My name is Emily Carter, and I'm 32 years old. I used to think the worst thing my family could do was forget me. I was wrong. The worst thing they ever did was remember exactly where I hurt, then press their thumb into it in front of everyone. It happened at Easter dinner, in the house I grew up in, while everyone was passing glazed carrots and pretending my father hadn't just cleared his throat like he was about to make a toast. My brother, Ryan, sat across from me with one arm draped over the back of his chair, too relaxed for someone hearing big news for the first time. My mother kept folding and refolding the corner of her napkin. Grandma sat at the far end of the table, quiet in that way old women get when they are not confused, not tired, but waiting. Dad stood beside the china cabinet and smiled like he was doing something generous. He announced that he and Mom had decided the family home would go to Ryan. Not someday. Not after a discussion. Not after asking how I felt about it. It was already decided. The house where I had spent childhood Easters hunting eggs behind the hydrangeas. The house where I had cleaned gutters, paid for plumbing repairs, taken Grandma to appointments, and slept on the couch during Mom's surgery recovery because Ryan was too busy. The house I still called home in my head, even though I only rented a one-bedroom apartment 20 minutes away. I remember laughing once, not because it was funny, but because my body didn't know where to put the shock. I asked why no one had talked to me. Ryan looked down at his plate. Mom looked at the napkin. Dad looked directly at me. And then he said, calmly, like he had been waiting years to say it, "Because you were never really one of us, Emily. Ask your mother." The room went so quiet, I could hear the refrigerator humming in the kitchen. My mother's face turned the color of wet paper. I looked at her because some childlike part of me still believed she would stand up, defend me, tell him he had gone too far. She didn't. Then Grandma pushed back her chair. Not quickly, not dramatically, just enough for every eye in the room to turn toward her. She reached into the worn black purse she always kept beside her chair and pulled out a cream-colored envelope, thick and slightly bent at the corners. She placed it on the table in front of me with both hands. Her voice shook, but her eyes did not. She said, "I've kept this for 25 years. And that was the moment I realized my father hadn't just humiliated me. He had accidentally opened a door my grandmother had been guarding for most of my life. If you've ever been made to feel like the problem for finally noticing how badly you were treated, tell me where you're listening from and what time it is there. Subscribe if stories about quiet people finally being heard speak to you. Tap like if you're already on my side, and turn on the notification bell so you don't miss the next one. Around here, silence is not weakness, and the truth has a way of arriving exactly on time. Now let me take you back. I was adopted when I was 4 years old. My parents never hid that from me, but they also never let me forget it. Not in a cruel, obvious way when I was little. More in the small sentences people can pretend are harmless. You were chosen. You should be grateful. Not every child gets a second chance. Those words sound beautiful until they are used every time you need something normal, like patience, fairness, or comfort. Ryan was my parents' biological son. He was 2 years younger than me, but somehow I was always expected to be the mature one. If Ryan broke something, he was spirited. If I questioned something, I was difficult. If he forgot Mother's Day, he was busy. If I missed one Sunday dinner because a child from one of my cases was in crisis, Mom said I was becoming distant. I became a pediatric social worker, which felt almost too ironic once I was old enough to understand myself. I spent my days helping children name feelings I had swallowed for years. I could spot fear behind politeness. I could hear abandonment in a child's silence. But when it came to my own family, I kept explaining things away. Dad was traditional. Mom hated conflict. Ryan was just used to being helped. And me, I was lucky. That was the family story. I had been lucky to be taken in, lucky to be loved, lucky to have a room, lucky to sit at that table. The house was the center of everything. It was a 2-story white house with green shutters, built before I was born and worn soft by decades of holidays. Grandma's kitchen always smelled like lemon dish soap and butter. The dining room had a scratch on the floor from the year Ryan dragged a chair across it and blamed me. The hallway still had faint pencil marks where Grandpa measured our heights when we were kids. I loved that house in the helpless way children love places, where they are still trying to belong. After Grandpa died, I started coming by more often. Grandma needed rides. Mom needed help organizing medications. Dad needed someone to call the roofer, argue with the insurance company, and remember which outlet in the back room sparked if you plugged in a heater. Ryan came for meals and left with leftovers. I came with receipts in my purse and paint under my fingernails. No one called that sacrifice. They called it being dependable. But Grandma noticed. She always noticed. Sometimes, when Dad called it my house, her hand would tighten around her coffee cup. Sometimes, when Mom said adoption made our family special, Grandma's mouth would press into a thin line. Once, after Grandpa's funeral, she caught me alone in the kitchen and said, "Your grandfather always believed a house should belong to the person who knows how to care for people." I thought she was comforting me. Now, looking back, I think she was trying to tell me something. And maybe she would have, if my mother hadn't walked in right then and asked why we were standing in the dark. Grandma never finished. For years, I carried that unfinished sentence without knowing it was a key. By the time Easter came around, I still believed my family's unfairness had limits. I still believed my mother's silence was fear, not betrayal. And I still believed that whatever I was to them, it had to be more than useful. I needed that to be true. Because the alternative was too painful to face. Because the alternative was too painful to face. So I did what I had always done. I helped. 3 weeks before Easter, Mom called me while I was sitting in my car outside the county office, eating crackers from a vending machine because a case visit had run long. She said Grandma's back steps were loose again, and Dad kept meaning to call someone, but he had been busy. She didn't ask if I could handle it. She just told me in that tired voice she used when she already knew I would. So that Saturday, I drove over with a toolbox, called a handyman I trusted, and paid the deposit before Dad even came outside. He stood on the porch with coffee in one hand and said, "You're good at this kind of thing." That was as close as he got to thank you. Grandma sat by the kitchen window while I wrote the check. She watched my hand move across the paper, then looked toward the hallway where Dad had gone. Her lips parted like she wanted to say something, but Mom came in carrying laundry, and the moment disappeared. That happened a lot in our family. Almost truths got interrupted by chores. The next week, Mom asked if I could help with Easter dinner because she was overwhelmed. She wanted ham, 2 casseroles, deviled eggs, a lemon cake for Grandma, and something Ryan likes, even though Ryan never brought anything except his appetite. I said yes. I always said yes. I bought groceries on my lunch break and dropped them off after work. On the kitchen counter, beside Mom's old recipe box, there was a folder I didn't recognize. It was dark blue, thick, with a property tax bill half tucked inside. I only saw it for a second before Dad came in from the dining room and slid it under a stack of newspapers. He did it too quickly. Not panicked, just practiced. I asked if everything was okay with the house. Mom answered before he could. "Everything's fine. Easter is just going to be important this year." I waited for her to explain. She rinsed a mixing bowl that was already clean. Dad said, "Don't start worrying over things that don't concern you." That sentence stayed with me longer than it should have. Things that don't concern you. The house concerned me when the water heater leaked. It concerned me when Grandma needed the downstairs bathroom grab bar installed. It concerned me when the roof estimate came in higher than Dad expected, and Mom asked if I could cover just part of it until they caught up. But when there was a folder on the counter, suddenly the house stopped concerning me. Ryan called 2 days before Easter, which was unusual because Ryan usually texted unless he needed something. He sounded cheerful, almost polished. He asked what time dinner was, whether Dad wanted him to dress nice, and if Grandma was in a decent mood. I said, why would Grandma not be? There was a pause. Then he laughed and said, no reason, just asking. When he showed up on Easter, he wore a button-down shirt I had never seen before and carried a bottle of wine with a bow around it. Mom acted like he had walked in carrying a kidney for transplant. Dad clapped him on the shoulder. Grandma watched from her chair in the living room, her hands folded over her purse. I noticed that purse because she usually hung it on the hook by the back door. That day, she kept it beside her. Dinner felt wrong from the beginning. Not loud wrong, not dramatic wrong, worse than that, prepared wrong. Aunt Linda and Uncle Mark were there, along with two cousins I barely saw anymore. Everyone seemed a little too careful. Mom kept checking Dad's face before speaking. Ryan kept glancing toward the china cabinet, where Dad had placed a manila envelope earlier and told me not to move it when I was setting out dessert plates. I had brought the deviled eggs, the potatoes, and the lemon cake Grandma liked. Ryan had brought wine. Dad praised the wine twice. Halfway through dinner, Dad tapped his knife lightly against his glass. My stomach tightened before he said a word. He talked about responsibility, about family legacy, about how a man reaches a certain age and starts thinking about what he will leave behind. He said Ryan was getting serious about settling down, and it was time to make sure the house stayed with the Carter name. I remember looking at Mom. She looked at her plate. Then Dad said he and Mom had decided the house would go to Ryan. Ryan didn't look surprised. He looked relieved. That was what hurt first. Not the announcement. The relief. Like he had been waiting for them to finally say out loud what all three of them had already agreed to. I asked carefully, when did you decide this? Dad's jaw tightened. Emily, don't make this awkward. I'm not trying to. I'm asking why no one talked to me. Ryan leaned back and sighed, like I had started an argument over a restaurant bill. Come on, you have your own life. My own life. My rented apartment. My overtime hours. My weekends at that house with repair receipts stuffed in my glove compartment. Mom whispered my name, but not like she was defending me, like she was warning me to stop. Dad said Ryan needed stability. He said the house was meant to stay with a son. He said I had always been independent, always been capable, always landed on my feet. That was the trick with my family. They turned every wound into a compliment. I said, so I was family enough to help take care of it, but not family enough to be included when you gave it away. The air changed. Aunt Linda shifted in her chair. One of my cousins looked down. Grandma's hand moved slowly to the clasp of her purse. Dad's face went flat. Then he looked at me the way he had in the opening moment of this story, with no embarrassment at all, and said I was never really one of them. He told me to ask my mother. And my mother, the woman I had spent my whole life waiting for, did not lift her eyes. Across the table, Grandma's purse clicked open. Across the table, Grandma's purse clicked open. No one moved. She pulled out the same cream-colored envelope I told you about earlier, the one with the softened corners and my name written across the front in Grandpa's handwriting. Not Dad's. Not Mom's. Grandpa. My father made a small sound through his nose, almost like a laugh. Mom, this is not the time. Grandma didn't look at him. She set the envelope in front of me and kept her fingers on it for a second, like she needed me to understand that this was not an opinion, not a family rumor, not an old woman being dramatic at dinner. This is paperwork, she said, and a letter. My hands felt cold when I opened it. The first page was a letter, folded into thirds. I recognized Grandpa's handwriting immediately because he used to write birthday cards in blocky blue ink, always pressing too hard so the words left dents on the paper. I didn't read all of it out loud. I couldn't. But I saw enough. He had written that he loved all of us, but he had watched the way I was treated. He wrote that I was expected to be grateful for a seat at the table, while Ryan was taught the table belonged to him. He wrote that children notice more than adults admit. Then there was one sentence that made my eyes blur so badly I had to stop. Emily takes care of this house, like she is still asking permission to belong in it. That was when my mother made a sound. Not a sob, not an apology, more like the sound someone makes when a locked door opens from the wrong side. Dad reached toward the papers. "Give me that." Grandma put her hand over his. "No." One word, quiet, solid. Ryan sat up straighter. For the first time all night, he didn't look relaxed. Under the letter were copies of documents. I didn't understand every line then, but I understood enough to know they were not sentimental keepsakes. There were signatures, dates, a trust name, Grandpa's name, Grandma's name, my name. Dad said they were old papers and had nothing to do with his decision. But Grandma finally looked at him then. "You never owned this house outright," she said. The room seemed to tilt. Mom closed her eyes. And that was the moment I knew she had known. Maybe not every detail, maybe not every legal line, but she had known enough to be afraid of that envelope. Grandma explained it simply because she had always known how to make complicated things sound plain. Grandpa and Grandma had owned the house. Before Grandpa died, he put it in a trust. Grandma had the right to live there as long as she wanted. After that, the house was named to go to me. Not Ryan. Not my parents. Me. Dad's face changed in stages. First annoyance, then disbelief, then anger that had nowhere clean to land because there were too many people watching. Ryan said, "That can't be right." But his voice had lost the easy tone from earlier. Grandma said Grandpa made the decision after years of watching me do the work everyone else called natural. She said he worried that when inheritance came up, I would be treated like I had been invited into the family, but never fully written into it. My mother whispered, "Please, not here." And I remember thinking, not here. They had chosen here. They had chosen Easter dinner, the relatives, the good dishes, the public announcement. They had chosen an audience when they thought the audience would help keep me quiet. Grandma only said, "He made it public, I'm answering it public." I did not win anything in that moment. That is important. I did not feel powerful. I did not feel satisfied. I felt like someone had handed me proof that the ache I had carried for years was real, and that almost hurt worse at first. Because if Grandpa saw it, and Grandma saw it, then it meant there had been something to see. I slid the papers back into the envelope with hands that would not stop shaking. Dad kept saying we needed to discuss this privately. Ryan said we should all calm down. Mom kept staring at the table like the wood grain might tell her what kind of mother she had been. I didn't argue. I just stood up, picked up the envelope, and told Grandma I would take her home if she wanted to leave. She said yes. That was the first choice anyone made that night that felt clean. The next morning, I called a legal aid attorney I knew through work. I told her I needed someone to look at property documents, not as a favor, but properly. I scanned everything. Then I went through my own records because paperwork was one thing I had learned never to throw away. Receipts for the back steps. Bank transfers for the roof estimate. Emails about the water heater. Texts from Mom asking if I could handle things because Ryan was busy. None of that made the house mine. I knew that. But it told the same story Grandpa's letter did. A week later, the attorney called me back. Her voice was careful, but clear. The trust appeared valid. Grandma's life interest was intact. My parents could not legally give the house to Ryan because it was not theirs to give. After I hung up, I sat on my apartment floor with the envelope in my lap. I didn't cry right away. I just breathed. For the first time, my family's version of reality was not the only one in the room. And when Ryan texted me that night saying he hoped I would do the right thing, I looked at the envelope, the receipts, and Grandpa's letter spread across my coffee table. Then I started writing down exactly what I needed to say. I didn't write a speech. I wrote facts. The trust name, the attorney's summary, Grandma's life interest, my name listed as beneficiary, the repairs I had paid for, the dates Mom had asked for help, the exact sentence Dad had said at Easter dinner, because I knew if I let them soften it later, I would start doubting myself again. We met the following Sunday, in Grandma's kitchen. Not the dining room. I wouldn't sit at that table again and pretend it meant family. Dad came in already irritated. Ryan came in looking like someone had convinced him this was a misunderstanding that could still be fixed. Mom stood near the sink and kept rubbing her thumb along the edge of her wedding ring. Grandma sat beside me. I placed the envelope on the table. Dad said, "Before this goes any further, I've spoken to people too. Old paperwork doesn't just override common sense." I nodded because I had expected that. Then I slid over the attorney's letter. I told them the documents had been reviewed. The trust appeared valid. Grandma had the legal right to live in the house for the rest of her life, and after that, ownership passed according to the trust, not according to Dad's announcement, not according to Ryan Quotes plans, not according to who carried the Carter name. The house was never theirs to give him. Ryan stared at the paper like if he looked long enough, the words might rearrange themselves. Dad's face went red, but this time his anger had no audience to perform for, just the people who already knew what he had done. He said Grandpa never meant to cut out his own family. Grandma answered quietly that Grandpa had been protecting family. That landed harder than shouting would have. Mom started crying then. She said she had been scared. She said Dad handled all the house decisions. She said she never wanted me hurt. For the first time in my life, her tears did not move me toward comfort. I asked her why she let him say I was never one of them. She covered her mouth, but she didn't answer. That was the answer. Ryan pushed his chair back and said this was punishing him for something that wasn't his fault. He said he had already started thinking about moving in, about renovations, about how the house made sense for his future. His future. Not Grandma's security, not Grandpa's wishes, not my years of showing up, just his future interrupted. I told him I wasn't taking anything from him. I was refusing to give him something that had never been his. After that, the family changed in the quiet way families actually change. No dramatic explosion. No one got arrested. No one lost everything overnight. But Aunt Linda called me 3 days later and said she was sorry she hadn't spoken up at Easter. One cousin texted that Dad's comment had bothered him more than he knew how to say at the table. Uncle Mark stopped inviting Dad to help with church fundraisers because, as he put it, people were asking questions. Mom tried to meet me alone twice. Both times, she wanted privacy before accountability. I wasn't cruel to her. I just stopped giving her the comfort of pretending silence had been harmless. Ryan didn't get the house. Dad stopped calling it his. And I stopped answering every call that began with someone needing me to be dependable. The legal process took time. Grandma stayed in the home exactly as Grandpa intended. I kept helping her, but something in me changed. I no longer came over like a child trying to earn a room. I came over like someone who had finally been told the truth. When Grandma was ready, we made the decision together. I could have kept the house. Part of me wanted to, if I'm honest. Not because I needed it, but because the wounded part of me wanted to sit in every room and say, "See, I belonged here." But houses remember what people do inside them. And I didn't want that place to spend the rest of its life as proof of a fight. So after the legal steps were finished, I worked with a local nonprofit that helped young adults aging out of foster care and families in transition. The house became part of their program. The last time I walked through it, Grandma's kitchen smelled faintly like lemon soap. I sat at her old table with the envelope in front of me. Grandpa's letter was inside. So was the deed copy, the paper that proved I had not imagined everything. Then I stood, locked the front door, and placed the envelope safely in my bag. A woman from the nonprofit waited on the porch with 2 young staff members behind her. I handed her the keys. Not to our Wayan. Not to my parents. To people who would make that house what I had needed it to be. A place where unwanted children were welcomed. And as I walked away, I finally understood something. Family is not blood. It is not a last name, a holiday table, or a story people tell to make themselves look kind. Family is behavior. And sometimes the sentence that breaks your heart is the same sentence that sets you free.